Welcome to Cryptid Monologues. Here we tell stories of the cryptid kind. We hope to fill your mind with thrilling, suspenseful entertainment. Please relax and enjoy. Thanks for joining. The Hunt at Lake Shannon. The morning broke crisp and silent over Lake Shannon. A fresh blanket of snow coated the mountains, muffling the world and transforming the familiar forest into an ethereal wonderland. The sky was a pale gray, tinged with hints of amber as the sun struggled to pierce through the heavy clouds. Evan Buckley, a seasoned hound hunter, stood at the trailhead, adjusting his worn leather gloves and tugging his cap snugly over his ears. His breath plumed in the icy air, and he could feel the anticipation thrumming in his chest. Beside him, three of his loyal hounds, Rex, Willow, and Bandit, danced with nervous energy, their noses already quivering at the myriad scents carried by the breeze. Today's quarry was elusive, a mountain lion. Reports of livestock attacks had been circulating among the ranchers in the valley, and the fresh snowfall was an opportunity too perfect to pass up. A clean slate of white made tracking easier, the big cat's paw prints unmistakable against the virgin snow. "Let's move," Evan muttered, his voice low but firm. The hounds lunged forward as if understanding his command, their noses pressed to the ground. Evan gripped his rifle and followed them into the forest, his boots crunching in the snow. The forest was eerily quiet, save for the occasional chatter of a squirrel or the caw of a distant crow. Evan scanned the trees, their skeletal branches heavy with snow, while keeping a close eye on the hounds. Rex, the eldest of the three, let out a deep, resonant bark that echoed through the stillness. "You got something, boy?" Evan called, quickening his pace. The other hounds joined in, their barks rising in excitement as they zeroed in on a trail. Evan knelt to examine the tracks they had found. There it was, the unmistakable round print of a mountain lion, with faint drag marks suggesting it had recently taken down prey. "This one's fresh," he murmured, his heart pounding. The chase was on. The hounds surged ahead, their baying growing louder as the scent trail strengthened. Evan pushed through the underbrush, branches clawing at his coat and snow slipping into his boots. The adrenaline coursing through him made him forget the cold and the ache in his legs. The thrill of the hunt was all-consuming. Suddenly, the hound's barks shifted, becoming sharper and more urgent. Evan broke into a sprint, his rifle at the ready. He burst into a small clearing and froze. There, perched on a rocky outcrop above the hounds, was the mountain lion. Its golden coat rippled as it turned its head, its green eyes locking onto Evan with an intensity that made him shiver. "Easy now," Evan whispered, raising his rifle. The lion snarled, its ears flattening against its head. For a moment, predator and prey stared at each other, the tension palpable. The lion moved first, leaping from the rock with breathtaking grace. It disappeared into the dense forest, the hounds taking off in hot pursuit. Evan cursed under his breath and followed, his boots sliding on the icy ground. The chase led him up a steep incline, the air growing thinner and colder with every step. When he reached the ridge, he saw the lion again. It was cornered against a sheer cliff, its tail lashing furiously. The hounds circled it, their barking relentless. Evan raised his rifle, his gloved finger resting on the trigger. The lion growled, crouching as if ready to spring. Evan hesitated. He had hunted for years, but there was something about this moment that made him pause. The lion's defiance, its raw power, and the way it stood its ground despite the odds. He took a deep breath and lowered his rifle. "Go on, get out of here," he called, waving his arms. The lion seemed to understand. With one last glance at Evan, it turned and leapt down the cliffside, vanishing into the wilderness. Evan whistled sharply, calling the hounds to his side. They whined in protest but obeyed, their tails wagging despite the anticlimactic end to the hunt. Evan knelt and scratched Rex behind the ears. "Sometimes it's not about the kill," he said softly. The forest around him seemed to exhale, the tension dissipating into the cold January air. As Evan turned to head back down the trail, Rex suddenly stiffened, his nose pointing toward a dense thicket nearby. The other hounds followed suit, their hackles rising and a low growl emanating from their throats. Evan froze, gripping his rifle tightly. "What is it now?" he muttered, scanning the brush. The hound's reaction wasn't like before. This was different, primal. A shadow moved within the thicket, and Evan caught a glimpse of something that made his blood run cold. A pair of glowing yellow eyes peered back at him, unblinking and predatory. The creature emerged slowly, and Evan's breath caught in his throat. It was a wolf, but far larger than any he had ever seen, its dark gray coat bristling and its massive jaws parted to reveal razor-sharp teeth. This wasn't an ordinary wolf. It was something else entirely, something primal and ancient. The beast let out a guttural snarl, and the hounds lunged forward, barking furiously. Evan shouted to call them back, his voice barely audible over the cacophony. The wolf's muscles bunched as it prepared to strike, its eyes flicking between the hounds and Evan. Time seemed to slow as Evan raised his rifle, his heart hammering in his chest. Before he could take aim, the wolf sprang, a blur of muscle and fury. It went for Bandit, who narrowly dodged the attack, snapping at the wolf's flank. The other hounds joined the fray, their fierce loyalty driving them to protect their master. Evan fired a warning shot into the air, the crack of the rifle echoing through the forest. The wolf paused, its ears twitching at the sound. For a moment, Evan thought it might retreat, but then it locked eyes with him again, its gaze full of challenge. Slowly, it backed away, disappearing into the shadows as silently as it had appeared. Evan lowered his rifle, his hands trembling. The hounds gathered around him, their sides heaving and their eyes still wild. "What in God's name was that?" Evan whispered, his voice barely audible. He knew one thing for certain. Whatever that creature was, it wasn't just another predator. The rancher's livestock wasn't falling prey to mountain lions alone. Something far more dangerous was stalking the snowy wilderness near Shannon Lake. As Evan led the hounds back toward the trailhead, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just crossed paths with a legend, and that it wouldn't be the last time. Into the canyon. Rather than retreating for the day, Evan's curiosity and resolve pushed him to continue deeper into the mountains. The strange wolf encounter gnawed at his mind, and he couldn't ignore the nagging thought that the answers lay further ahead. After loading his hounds into the back of his truck, he drove along a narrow, snow-packed trail that wound higher into the range. The sky darkened with approaching evening, and the shadows in the valleys below deepened into an inky blackness. His journey ended at the mouth of a canyon, its jagged walls towering ominously on either side. Evan grabbed his gear, his rifle slung across his back, and released the hounds. The dogs sniffed the air warily, their earlier enthusiasm replaced by cautious curiosity. The canyon seemed to absorb sound, the usual forest noises muffled into a strange, oppressive silence. "Stay close," Evan muttered, his voice low. He led the hounds into the canyon, the crunch of their steps on the icy ground echoing faintly off the rock walls. The deeper they ventured, the darker it grew. Evan switched on his flashlight, its narrow beam slicing through the gloom. The walls of the canyon seemed to close in, and the air grew colder, biting at his exposed skin. The hounds' behavior became increasingly uneasy. They whined softly, their tails tucked low, and frequently glanced over their shoulders. Then, a sound froze Evan in his tracks. A low, guttural rumble reverberated through the canyon, unmistakably different from the earlier wolf's growl. It was deeper, almost otherworldly, and it seemed to vibrate through the very rock. The hounds went silent, their ears pinned back as they crowded close to Evan. He swept the flashlight beam ahead, and his heart nearly stopped. A massive figure emerged from the shadows, its hulking form dwarfing anything Evan had ever seen. It stood upright, its body covered in thick, matted fur that glinted faintly in the flashlight's glow. Its eyes were luminous, a piercing amber that seemed to see straight through him. Evan's rifle felt suddenly insignificant against the sheer presence of the creature. He didn't need to convince himself of what he was seeing. This wasn't a bear or any animal he could rationalize. It was a Bigfoot, and it was staring directly at him. The creature let out a low, rumbling exhale, its breath visible in the frigid air. Evan's hands trembled as he tightened his grip on the rifle, unsure if he should aim or flee. The hounds remained rooted in place, their instincts torn between fear and loyalty. "Easy," Evan whispered, his voice barely audible. He slowly lowered the flashlight, not wanting to provoke the towering figure. The Bigfoot tilted its head, its gaze unwavering. Then it took a step forward, the ground beneath it trembling slightly with its weight. Evan's breath caught as the creature reached out one massive, fur-covered hand. Its movements were slow, almost deliberate, as though it was testing his reaction. For a moment, Evan felt an unspoken connection, a primal understanding that defied logic or language. The Bigfoot's eyes softened, its posture relaxing slightly. But the moment shattered when a distant howl echoed through the canyon, high-pitched and bone-chilling. The Bigfoot's head snapped toward the sound, its expression changing to one of urgency. It turned back to Evan, locking eyes with him one last time before vanishing into the shadows with a speed that defied its size. Evan stood frozen, his heart pounding in his ears. The hounds barked uneasily, their earlier courage returning as the immediate threat disappeared. He knew he had encountered something extraordinary, something that would change his life forever. Whatever the howl had been, it was enough to send even the legendary creature into retreat. The unexpected partner. Evan returned 2 days later, driven by an insatiable determination to hunt the massive wolf. But as he prepared to track the beast through the fresh snow, he sensed that he wasn't alone. Something or someone was watching him. The hounds, unusually quiet, led him toward a dense grove at the edge of the forest. Evan's pulse quickened as he caught a glimpse of movement through the trees. At first, he thought it might be the wolf again. But what stepped into view stopped him in his tracks. It was the Bigfoot, the same towering figure he had seen in the canyon. It stood partially hidden among the trees, its amber eyes fixed on Evan with an intensity that made his skin prickle. But this time, the creature didn't exude the same otherworldly menace. Instead, there was a curious stillness about it, as though it had been waiting for him. "What are you doing here?" Evan muttered, half to himself. The Bigfoot tilted its head slightly, as though trying to understand his words. Then it pointed, a deliberate, unmistakable gesture, toward the ridge where Evan had last seen the wolf. Evan's heart raced. Was it trying to lead him, or warn him? Either way, he couldn't ignore the strange alliance that seemed to be forming. He nodded, gripping his rifle tightly. "All right then, let's see where this goes." With the Bigfoot moving silently through the forest beside him and the hounds at his heels, Evan ventured deeper into the wilderness. The air grew colder, and the shadows lengthened as they approached the ridge. The hounds barked occasionally, their voices echoing through the trees, but they stayed close, their usual boldness tempered by the presence of the enigmatic creature. As they climbed higher, the snow grew deeper, and the forest gave way to rocky outcrops and narrow trails. Evan kept his eyes on the ground, scanning for tracks, but it was the Bigfoot who stopped first. It crouched low, its massive hand brushing the snow aside to reveal a fresh paw print, far larger than any wolf track Evan had ever seen. "Good find," Evan murmured, his breath visible in the frigid air. The Bigfoot straightened, its gaze fixed on the distant ridge. Evan followed its line of sight and felt a chill run down his spine. There, silhouetted against the pale gray sky, was the wolf. It stood atop the ridge, its massive frame unmistakable even at a distance. But it wasn't alone. A second wolf, equally large and just as menacing, emerged from the shadows to stand beside it. Evan's grip tightened on his rifle. The hounds growled low, their hackles raised. The Bigfoot let out a low rumbling sound, its amber eyes narrowing as it turned to Evan. There was no mistaking the urgency in its expression. The hunt was no longer just about survival. It was a battle against the primal forces of nature itself. With the Bigfoot as his unlikely partner, Evan knew this would be the fight of his life. Battle of Legends. The wolves descended from the ridge with a predatory grace, their massive forms gliding through the snow like ghosts. The larger wolf, its dark coat streaked with frost, bared its fangs in a snarl that sent a shiver down Evan's spine. The second wolf, slightly smaller but no less imposing, circled to the side, its yellow eyes locked on the Bigfoot. The Bigfoot stepped forward, placing itself between Evan and the advancing wolves. It let out a deep, guttural roar that echoed through the valley, a sound so primal and fierce that it seemed to shake the very ground. The wolves hesitated for a moment, their ears flattening as they assessed their opponent. But hesitation quickly gave way to action. The larger wolf lunged, a blur of muscle and fur, its jaws snapping toward the Bigfoot's massive arm. The clash was thunderous. The Bigfoot swung a tree trunk-like arm, catching the wolf mid-leap and sending it tumbling into the snow. But the smaller wolf seized the opportunity, darting in to snap at the Bigfoot's leg. The creature roared in pain, kicking out with a force that sent the wolf skidding across the icy ground. Blood sprayed across the snow, staining it crimson as the battle escalated into a primal frenzy. Evan stood frozen, his rifle useless in his hands. The hounds barked furiously but stayed back, their instincts telling them that this was a fight beyond their capacity. He could only watch as the titanic struggle unfolded before him, the wolves and the Bigfoot locked in a deadly dance of survival. The larger wolf recovered quickly, shaking off the blow and launching itself again. This time it aimed for the Bigfoot's throat, its fangs glinting in the dim light. The Bigfoot caught the wolf midair, its massive hands closing around the wolf's torso. With a roar of effort, it hurled the beast against a boulder, the impact echoing like a gunshot. The wolf yelped but scrambled to its feet, blood dripping from its maw. It was relentless, driven by an ancient rivalry that seemed to transcend reason. Meanwhile, the smaller wolf circled back, its cunning evident in its movements. It feinted to the left, drawing the Bigfoot's attention before darting in from the right. Its teeth sank into the creature's arm, eliciting a howl of rage. The Bigfoot swung wildly, trying to dislodge the attacker, but the wolf held firm, its jaws locked in a vice-like grip. Evan's heart pounded as he watched the Bigfoot stagger under the combined assault. It was bleeding now, dark crimson streaking its matted fur. But the creature's resolve was unbroken. With a sudden surge of strength, it slammed its arm against a nearby tree, crushing the wolf against the trunk. The smaller wolf released its grip with a pained yelp, falling to the ground and limping away to regroup. The larger wolf seized the moment, charging in with a ferocity that took the Bigfoot off guard. The two titans collided, their snarls and roars echoing through the canyon. Snow flew in all directions as they grappled, their massive forms rolling and thrashing in a brutal contest of strength and will. Hours seemed to pass as the battle raged on. Evan could feel the cold seeping into his bones, but he couldn't tear his eyes away. The Bigfoot's movements grew slower, its roars less forceful, while the wolves' attacks became increasingly desperate. Blood and fur littered the ground, a grim testament to the ferocity of the fight. Finally, with a roar that seemed to shake the very mountains, the Bigfoot delivered a devastating blow. It caught the larger wolf by the neck and slammed it into the ground, holding it there with an iron grip. The smaller wolf limped forward, growling weakly, but it too was on the verge of collapse. The Bigfoot released the larger wolf, stepping back with labored breaths. The wolves, sensing their own limits, retreated slowly, their movements cautious and pained. They disappeared into the shadows, their glowing eyes the last to fade from sight. Evan exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The Bigfoot turned to him, its amber eyes weary but still burning with an otherworldly intensity. It staggered slightly, blood dripping from numerous wounds, and collapsed to one knee. Evan hesitated before stepping forward, his rifle lowered. "You saved me," he said softly, his voice shaking. The Bigfoot's eyes met his, and for a moment there was an unspoken understanding between them. Evan reached out cautiously, his hand trembling as it rested on the creature's massive arm. "Thank you," he whispered. The Bigfoot grunted softly, its expression almost acknowledging his words. Then, with a Herculean effort, it rose to its feet. It turned and began to walk away, its massive form disappearing into the trees. Evan watched until it was gone, the weight of the encounter settling heavily on his shoulders. He knelt to check on the hounds, who whined softly but appeared unhurt. "Come on, boys," he said, his voice hoarse. Together they made their way back down the trail, the memory of the battle etched forever in Evan's mind. Aftermath. The legend of Shannon Lake had become more than just a story. Evan knew he would never forget what he had seen, and he doubted anyone would believe him if he told them. But as he looked back toward the ridge, he felt a strange sense of peace. He had witnessed something extraordinary, a battle of survival, of ancient rivalries, and of unexpected alliances, and in that he found a profound respect for the wild and its mysteries.